I'm going to talk a little bit about the company that I've set up and what I'm looking to achieve with that. I'm going to talk about Australian EPCM and engineering companies and how they're set up. I'm going to run through a lot today on project procurement, so how you build the relationship with Australian engineering houses, how you conduct meetings, what they're looking for. Going through my experiences at working with companies such as Lycopodium, Judgement, TWP, doing a lot in the mining space predominantly, working with some major equipment providers such as Nordberg, Metso, Autotech, so really giving you a lot of feedback about that. I'm going to talk about some of the projects. I'll go through an evaluation process, so really the science behind, or sometimes there's not a lot of science behind, but how we actually select who's going to get the order, to try and give you that insight. So give you an idea of what I'm looking for in tenders when I receive them. As we know, it's an exceptionally competitive market. We'll talk about the Australian supply chain, and we'll talk about the oil and gas projects that are coming online and how they're absolutely crushing our supply chain. So if an Australian engineering house is actually executing a project in Africa, it's going to be very unlikely that that manufacturer of those goods are going to come out of Australia. So it's what's the competitive advantage and what's the point of difference between a South African supplier and a supplier from Asia, because that is your competitor predominantly much in the marketplace. So I'm going to introduce my team, our capabilities, and hopefully highlight some of our experience in Africa. So I've been involved with project procurement for 23 years, working on major resource projects and value up to $1.2 billion. As I've said, I've worked for a number of EPCM and engineering companies, and also for international equipment suppliers such as Metso, Nordberg and Autotech. So everything from grinding mills, crushers and screens, flotation cells and thickeners. So that's my background. What I've focused on in the development of my company is really on supply chain management. So everything from rationalising the number of suppliers to making sure companies are leveraging their buying, get the best value, working through companies on their project procurement services and systems to making sure, once again, they're making informed and educated decisions about their supply chain, helping new suppliers develop relationships with major engineering companies directly with clients where appropriate, getting their products and services into the marketplace, helping with pre-qualification and auditing processes. New business development, pretty much in the same sort of field, so looking at what a realistic target is. What I found really interesting in the sessions I've run previously over the last few days is the number of guys who've got a great product or a great idea, but they're not quite sure how to push that into a new market or to get the Australians to understand and accept that. So that's been really refreshing, that there's a lot of innovation and a lot of new ideas still coming through in the engineering space. Business systems refinement, so once again looking at how we can optimise workings within a company, and customised training, which covers everything from inducting people and going through the quality system requirements, especially if you're in oil and gas. The countries that are slightly shaded, a little bit darker, are the countries where my team and I have actually executed projects. So a fair space. So of a small team of 5, we've executed a lot of projects. I myself have worked with Barrick and done the procurement for 5 projects in Tanzania, and more recently working with Judgement, I was a procurement and contracts manager on a copper project in Botswana. Despite the rumours and sporting conflicts, Australians actually like Africa, or Africans, as Australian resource companies now have more projects in Africa than anywhere else in the world. There are 220 Australian companies invested in 595 oil and gas and mining projects in 42 African countries. And in 2010 alone, 48 companies invested in 143 new projects. So there's an established relationship, there's a willingness and a continuity to do business, and it's really about connecting South African suppliers. And when I say the word suppliers today, I mean everything from fabricators, contractors, consultants, as people that supply goods or services. The bad news, or if you're wearing the Australian hat, the bad news, and I might have some contradictions across the table here, but I've found in my experience a serious decline in the amount of equipment and fabricated steel, structural steel, that has actually been manufactured in Australia. It's been pushed offshore a lot. There's been significant or a major lack of capital investment, volatility in the project and commodity market over the past few years, and now the sheer scale of projects. Most of the projects that I've worked on in the past have been $400–500 million projects, We've now got individual projects of $42 billion. So you can appreciate the scale, the requirements of those. And we're going to go through the oil and gas projects just in WA alone, and the numbers are very staggering. We've also been, I think, very poor in the development of our labour resources, so taking on apprentices, making sure that we've got skilled workers coming through in our own shops, and I think that's a major curse on what we've been doing. The cost, volume and schedule pressures have forced a lot of Australian companies to develop partnerships or set up manufacturing facilities through Asia. I have a small engineering workshop that I use, and really the Australian office is a shop front. It's an interface point. They do design, they do a very minimal amount of fabrication there. It's normally the high-end fabrication. So it's the duplexes, the supers, it's the real exotic materials in the oil and gas space. Anything that's, 250 mould steel, carbon steel, relatively simple, they've got 3 factories in Asia. So they push it off to Vietnam or to Thailand. So that's a model that we see a lot. Even a lot of the major equipment suppliers, they've got their facility in China. You want to buy a compressor, here's the price from the unit out of China. Once again, where Australian suppliers really struggle is if it's a high volume or repetitive item. And now that these projects are of such scales, it's not, we want to buy 1 genset anymore, it's we want to buy 50 gensets until we build a power station. So that sheer volume is just saying we want the same thing. If it's off the shelf, it's going offshore. Local content requirements. Each sort of state in Australia seems to make up its own rules. There doesn't seem to be any cohesive or legislative body. And what happens is a major resource company such as Chevron will come along and they'll say we're looking to develop a $42 billion project, and they'll dictate what they think the local content should be. Once again, I'm going to focus now on oil and gas projects, and I appreciate a lot of you aren't targeting Australian oil and gas projects, but I want to show what's happened to our supply chain to reinforce the fact that we really want South African content, and we have to source equipment and goods and fabrication from somewhere else because we can't do it. Project approvals are just being delayed just because we can't get people, and our supply chain is struggling. Oil and gas projects are 30 to 50 years operating life typically, and there's such a huge investment in them. And to some extent, I feel that a lot of the mining projects in oil and gas are just building stuff to actually use on oil and gas projects. Our current infrastructure can't cope with our project requirements. In the Pilbara region of Western Australia, we have the Gorgon project sitting over here, and there in Onslow we have a whole stream of projects coming online. So we have Wheatstone, we have Inpex on the border, we have Pluto 2 and 3 upgrades, we have Macedon coming online. Now, this is in construction phase, and construction on the first one of these is really kicking off in June next year. And we have 5 ports in the northwest, and they're already got 90 days congestion. So our infrastructure can't handle. So we're looking at going as far across as Darwin, and then trucking across, or hopefully developing up Geraldton. So we're already, before we even move into construction phase, having major port congestion. Another issue another reason we struggle with transport and logistics is on the Gorgon project, estimating wasn't having a good day, and they actually underestimated the transport requirements of the amount of items being transported by a factor of 7. So you're on a $42 billion project, and you've underestimated your transport by that much. Gorgon's an interesting one. Gorgon's on Barrow Island, and it's just off the coast. It's a Class A nature reserve, and basically that means every piece of equipment that goes there has to go through a quarantine process where it's stripped and fumigated and cleaned and then shrunk, wrapped in paper. So if you buy a big yellow machine that moves dirt, and that will typically cost $350,000 to $450,000 Australian dollars, you will then spend another $120,000 or $150,000 just going through that process to get it on the island. So that's the scale. Because there's turtles there, there's frogs there. The first person that brings a piece of pollen or a grass seed or some foreign material there, the project gets suspended. So that was the requirement of the state government when they sat down and negotiated with Chevron, that they will maintain that. I estimate probably of the 42 billion, probably 2 billion is going to be in managing the environment and going through the packing procedure. So in the Pilbara region alone, as I've said, we're working on Gorgon, Wheatstone, Pluto expansions 2 and 3, Macedon and Impex. So basically these are approved projects which will be executed in the next 3 years. 2 trillion rand. That's oil and gas, just oil and gas, not mining projects. And that's just in one state, 2 trillion rand. So you can appreciate the requirements, if there is any manufacturing left, that it's getting sucked up there. You can imagine the resource constraints. The Chevron model for supply chain is wanting continuity. So I haven't officially said this, but the Gorgon project's running here, and the intent was as soon as that finished, they would move the entire supply chain, subject to performance, onto the next project, and then on to the next project. So it's not about building a relationship and doing a good job and getting things done in one project, it's about a very long cycle. And you can appreciate that this gets delayed, suddenly this starts getting pushed out, because we just can't get the resources. So basically, when we're looking for partners to work on our projects, wherever they are, you know, it's always about quality, it's about schedule, it's about being cost efficient, it's about sustainability, and it's about reliability in a long-term view. So it's not a matter of ramping up and coming on board and working one project and then suddenly, you know, that drops off. So it's about building long-term. Chevron want to keep using the same people. It takes them a long time to get vendors and suppliers pre-qualified. They want to keep building them keep using them subject to performance. And just I know there'll be a few people in the room. This is the small fabrication shop that I use from time to time in Perth. That actually makes the odd thing in Perth. So just a couple of exciting pictures for you. So once again, they have a small facility in Perth, and they basically utilise their 3 workshops through Asia. So I'm going to spend a bit of time now going through project procurement. So the Australian EPCM or engineering structure, and I imagine the South African model was relatively the same. So you have your board of directors, you have your study manager or project manager, sometimes known as that. Then he basically controls his team. So you have the process people. It's important to be nice to them because they write all the data sheets and actually help spec everything up. Then it goes through the various technical disciplines, so civils, mechanical, electrical. What's happening because of resource constraints and the scale of the projects, a lot of these functions that is an EPCM is outsourcing the whole function. So they might say Gorgon civils broken down into 3 packages, each about $4 billion. So we actually push that out even to one of our competitors. They can't manage that function in-house. You know, quite a lot of companies will, you know, get the ore bodies and the testings and metallurgy pushed out. That's quite standard. But whole disciplines, we can't do the electrics on this job. We're going to outsource that. And then the important people that do all the work, project controls. So they pay you. They do the scheduling. They do the procurement. Sort of QA normally sits over here, sort of bolts in, and sort of supervises, gets involved in developing scopes, reviewing those for risk, but also supervising the content through the various technical disciplines. In my experience working on projects, regardless of the size, there's generally about 120 packages. That's about as many as the engineering company will handle. So anything, if there's a lot more than that, they'll generally outsource a whole function, a whole discipline, a whole line. They generally only want to cope with about 120, and that's their work breakdown structure. What the project manager is really trying to manage is obviously his schedules, budget, and any client-specific requirements, such as quality or HSEC, health, safety, environmental, community. I think it's really important to know if you're tendering what your client or what the engineer's client's big drivers are. When I was working with TWP and we were doing an expansion out at the Leinster project where we were sinking a deep shaft, it was 1,450 metres deep. We had a client and we shortlisted 2 tenderers for the shaft sinking, and there was one using the South African model and there was one using the Canadian model, and there was an $11 million price differential. And the client came to us and says, who do you perceive, or which method do you perceive to be the safest? And it wasn't based necessarily on a lot of science or a lot of fact. He says, our big driver on this project is safety. And we thought, yeah, that's right. And then we basically said, well, we think this option is the safest. And that was the one that was $11 million more expensive. And the client says, then we'll do that. And they signed up. They put their money where their mouth was and spent another 77 million rand because it was perceived to be safer. So when you're in that tendering space, what are your client's drivers? Is it schedule? So do you really need to look at putting in an option for, for night shift, and basically reducing schedule. So getting that information as soon as you can. Okay, so we have the supply chain funnel. You start off with early engagement. You have that first meeting, everyone's your friend. Basically keep communicating, sending information across. And then, there might be pre-qualification, there might be some audits, desktop, come and visit you in the workshop. And then you get that first budget inquiry, so budget quotation request. That might be sort of plus or minus 40%. And then suddenly they want to go see a bank about it, and then they want to see a real serious bank about it. And then we get the actual tender, so an invitation to tender arrives. Then there's a bit of negotiation, and hopefully there's an award. So, you might get 100 of these, and then you might get 50 of these, and then you might get 20 of these, and you might win 1 or 2 of those. Whatever your industry is and how good you are, really. In the past, in my experience, I've sort of found from there to there, it takes about 2 years. So the first time you knock on the door and tell them how good you are and go through until you've actually got an order, on average takes about 2 years. What I've found, because of supply chain constraints, it's really compressed to about 6 months. Now, what's an interesting thing that I've noticed in supply chain is if you come down here and you put in a horrendous number, or you don't respond, or, for whatever reason it slips through the cracks, generally it restarts the clock, because you've lost that one opportunity. If you've lost that confidence, it all starts again. So you come down here, you put in a tender, and you completely misread the scope. We have a really bad day doing the tender. It takes a long time. You're back up here again. I think it's important if you put in a tender, you get, or a budget price, you get that feedback. It's not over here. You're still going through the process. So ring up, how was my pricing? It was out by 2%. So you've got a chance to do something about that before you actually get to the tender. You don't have a lot, and if you get to that stage. So who actually selects who's on the list? So we have 120 packages for a project. If it's equipment supply, there'll be between 3 and 5 tenderers normally. If it's fabricated steel, it might be 7 to 10. Specialist equipment, 4 or 5. And sometimes there's the old sole source option, which the procurement people really hate, but that one supplier for some reason tends to like. A lot of it comes down to client preference. So do they already have existing mine sites in that country? Do they want commonality of spares? Do they want synergies with service and maintenance agreement? I was working on a project in Tanzania, and I needed to purchase some electric motors. I sent out 5 expressions of interest, and they came back, and I was reviewing those with the client, and he noticed one of the companies on the list, and he says, they're off the list. I thought, I might have a problem here, I quite like them. And I sort of said, well, why are they off the list? He said, 26 years ago, they supplied a motor to me and it caught fire. Okay, is there any chance that you will change your mind? No. So once again, we ordered about $2 million because of that experience 26 years ago. That disqualified them. Subsequently did another 4 projects in that country for that client. So it's really important that you build on that client relationship and recover when a mistake occurs. Engineering company preference, so that's based a lot on previous supply history and performance. So once again, about building that relationship. And then there's that horrible thing I call marketplace feedback, which very often is not based on reality. And it might be the rumour, the gossip. Fabrication is cheap in Asia. So basically the client will hear that, and sort of when they look at the list of tenderers, why aren't you going out to Asia? It's cheaper there. So there may not be a lot of fact in it. So what actually happens for most projects, 95% plus of the companies that are on the tenders list are pre-selected. So it's a really small window for new suppliers. So when you get that opportunity, it's got to be a great first impression. So early engagement at the top of the funnel, the first meeting is critical. There are some misperceptions of South African suppliers. I'm going to go through those in detail later on. It's about relationship management. So you go and do the first meeting, but how you continue the interaction. Let them know that what your capability in the factory is. Let them celebrate success. Tell them what projects you're working on, what orders you've won. It builds a team spirit that should become part of it. Let them know about any changes in your capabilities and your core products, so what acquisitions you've made. Keep interacting with them. A big thing I find is business ethics, and I generally have the $100 rule. So if a supplier comes and meets me and he gives me a pen or wants to give me a calendar or something of that nature, if it's less than $100, I generally don't have an issue with that. If there's going to be a sustained or a long-term business relationship, that's certainly fine in mining. If you're dealing with an oil and gas company, you can have nothing, not a paperclip. You cannot have another company's logo or promotional material anywhere near your building. So once again, know who your target is, know the culture of that industry or that organisation. I certainly learnt that with GE Oil and Gas, that, you know, God forbid you should have, you know, a coaster or a calendar from someone else. So it's really important. So you receive your expression of interest and you're going to provide a budget quotation request. Respond to the acknowledgements. A lot of this is housekeeping 101, but being inside engineering companies and actually saying who's good and who's going to continue and who gets cut from the list, I'm going to give you the points that I sort of work through. Treat each inquiry as a tender, even if it's only budget price. Don't handwrite it. You know, take the time to put some care into it. Ask questions. You know, this is when you start building that relationship. What's the client really looking to achieve? Is it safety? Is it schedule? What are his drivers? You know, the engineering house needs your information. You know, you still have a lot of control in that relationship. From a South African perspective, I've had a lot of issues with companies being honest about their capability and capacity. They overstate the amount of steel they can do, or they don't tell us that currently their workshop's at 95% for the next 2 years. So, you know, they get all excited and they say, we've got all this wonderful stuff, and we send the inquiry, and then they come back and say, we can't do it. So that's frustrating. That's blowing your chance. You're back to the top of the funnel. And follow up to obtain meaningful feedback. So, you know, how was our budget price? You know, is the schedule too long? Keep building that relationship. You know, you keep working on that so the quality of your tender is going to be that much better. So the tendering process. So you finally got that inquiry and you're looking forward to completing it. Always provide a conforming bid wherever possible. But don't be afraid to offer some innovation, some value adding, some real client benefit. You need to be careful though. You know, the engineering company generally controls and owns the capital budget. The client or asset owner normally owns the operations budget. So you might come up with a piece of equipment that's really, really expensive, but it's got a massive saving over years. You know, is the engineer going to be realistically looking to put that in their scope? So once again, you've got to sell that to the engineer and see if they can sell that to the client. So you've got to be careful that you're not overshooting what the engineer is expecting. When you speak to the tender issue, ask what those client drivers are. Like I say, you're still friends at this stage. And a big bugbear of procurement people is don't ask for an extension the day before the tender closes. If you need more time, ask at the start of the tendering process. You're more likely to get your concessions. Generally what happens in an Australian engineering house, we'll ring up 2 or 3 local suppliers and say, what's your current estimating backlog? What's your time? You know, that's got no reflection on your workload. It's got no reflection on holidays and cultural things that you've got coming up. So if you need 4 weeks instead of 3 weeks, ask at the start of the process. What quite often happens is, you know, we'll send it out and then, you know, 3 or 4 companies will ring up the next day saying, we really need 4 weeks. And then we'll make that straight away. There's more chance of us managing that extra time at the start of the process. Okay, so the tender arrives and the big bugbears are where people basically get thrown out of the building. Simple things, not filling out data sheets or schedules. So basically, the evaluation process, most engineering companies now have 2 or 3 weeks at most to go through the entire evaluation, recommendation, negotiation, closeout and award. So it's all about time. If you get the data sheets and schedules in a PDF and you want to fill them out in Excel or Word to save you time, ask the tenderer or the tender issuer, because they'll do that. You know, not supplying enough technical information to be able to evaluate the bid. You may know your equipment, you may know your systems, you may know what your key assets are. You've got to keep selling yourself. Quite often we don't get a quality assurance manual table of contents. We don't want the whole manual, we don't want all your welding procedures, but just give us the table of contents. Let us know that you have that system, that you have that structure. Give us your safety management plan. Give us your organisation chart. I'll just check my audience. One issue I find, especially with electrical companies, is they give you too much generic information. You suddenly wonder why your computer's not working and someone sends you 180 megabyte. Because you've sent them an inquiry for a transformer and they've sent you the manual for every transformer they've built in the last 120 years. You know, it's lazy, it shows that they're not really interested and they certainly didn't read the scope. So once again, just give the table of contents, give that generic. It's not a sales exercise. We don't want your complete library. If you want to do that, put it in a hard copy and courier it to us or drop it off or wherever it may be. Don't send that in with the tender. Keep it relevant. Give us enough information to evaluate it. It happens all the time, and I don't know how people manage it in Excel, but project schedules that just don't add up. quite often people will go in there and over-type the bottom line. And I'm a very optimistic person, as most procurement people are, so I normally pick the lowest price, and I just assume that I'm getting a project discount. So, once again. And on the subject of spreadsheets, the number of times that I look at the first tab and I see the price schedule and that's all nice, and I'm a curious person, and I click on the second tab and there's all the costings. So that's fine. I don't mind you telling me what your costs are, because it certainly makes it a lot easier when I do my negotiation, because you'll not be getting 40%. And that happens so many times. And I've even had clients do it. They've sent me their pricing schedule and they put all my competitors' costings on the other tabs. So I like it if you're open and you want to run an open, cost plus 3% or whatever it may be, but that's up to you. So be careful, once again, with price schedules. I really enjoy it when I get a really sincere letter from a company sort of saying, we're so excited with this project and this opportunity, and we're really looking forward to working with you. And then they've actually put our competitors' name on it. So, the sincerity and the love has sort of left the room. We're all victims of cut and paste, but just get someone else to review your work. Make sure that you cover it. There's nothing that sort of puts you off quicker than your competitor's name on a quote. Deliver with passion. It's an opportunity to really sell yourself. So tell us how good you are. Tell us what you've won. Give us a project reference listing that's relevant. Don't give us 143 pages if you're an electrical company of everything you've ever done. Make it for that country. Make it for that commodity. Show that relationship with that client. Show your successes. And once again, you've got all the way down there. You might have spent 18 months building a relationship. You put in a really shocking tender. You're off the list next time and the time after that. So you're back at the top of the tree. And if there's a situation where for time constraints or it's not really your core business, be honest. Tell us. If you tell us as soon as you get that tender that, hey, look, our estimators are busy for 18 weeks, or we've got this in the factory and we're not going to move it for a while, that's fine. We're still friends. We'll still use you the next time. But once again, you come in on the last day and sort of say, oh, I'm not putting a tender in, we're actually too busy. Once again, that limits us. And suddenly we might go from 3 tenderers to 2 tenderers, and you've really given your competitor such a big advantage. And there's a lot of times when it's momentum. When I buy electric motors, when I've been working in the grinding mill space, it's momentum. You keep using a supplier, his price is good, his delivery's good, he delivers, he performs. The next time, he's got the run-up start. It's momentum. So you put in one bad tender, it sort of says, well, do we want to really deal with you? So think about that. I get suppliers that sort of say, oh, but you're judging us too harshly. That's what the whole tendering process is. It's about judgment. It's you demonstrating your capability to work on our projects. So expect to be judged. That's the whole process. And a real change I've found in the marketplace, and probably over the last 5 years, is engineering companies is first price, best price. So in the old days, people would sort of add 10 or 15% fat and assume that we'll come together and we'll sit in a meeting, we'll shake hands, and I'll be a really great negotiator and really aggressive, and suddenly you'll peel off 10% of your price and we'll walk away happy. Don't build that fat, don't build that contingency in. We're not shortlisting these days. We're going straight from 5 companies to 1 and negotiating with them. Don't add fat in. If your schedule, you're not sure about your schedule, you think it could be 16 to 18 weeks or 16 to 20 weeks, write the range and say negotiable. We know that you've got other orders coming in. We can understand that. But if you say, well, we'll put 30 weeks, schedule could be critical in that package. So make it a realistic. Don't say 2 weeks. We'll be having another discussion on liquidated damages. So that's important to go through that. And at the end of the day, the mindset, guys, is the engineer is not buying your products or services, they're recommending them to their clients. So help us to sell them. So generally when an engineering house is doing an evaluation summary, we do spreadsheets. So we've got company A, B and C. So your tender comes in, we go through the commercials. So basically, okay, LDs, they'll take 5%, they don't care. They won't do anything, they'll take 10%. So we'll go through those. We'll list the exceptions, and if we have time, we'll send out commercial clarifications and try and resolve that. The intent is, at the end of this process, we feel that we can award a contract or work with that company. That's what the procurement team are looking to achieve. Then the technical guys in its process and go through all the different disciplines. They go say, well, we wanted this, do they meet that requirement? We wanted this, do they meet that requirement? So they go through, and once again, if they've got the time, we'll go through and do technical clarifications. Otherwise, we'll guess. Then we come down to basically your pricing. So we want to buy a red bicycle, and we want to buy a blue bicycle. Okay, so this company thinks it's $100 and $50. This company thinks it's $50 and it's $100. These guys haven't read the spec, and they think it's $1,000 and $1. So basically we could either split the order, or more likely we would just say, you don't understand the scope, we're already down to 2. And then what happens, so we end up with our original bid price. And then we do our equalisation. And if you don't tell us information, then basically we have a really horrible conservative guess. So if you don't put in the cost of export packing, then we're going to say that's $50. Let's say this company is in South Africa and this company is in Asia. So basically, and we're coming back to the concept of point of difference. So we'll say QA systems. Okay, well this company's got a really established QA system. This company we haven't dealt with before. So how much is it going to cost to put an inspector in there to own that process, to manage it? We put in a number there. So we look at transport and logistics. Okay, we're executing this project in Botswana, so minimal risk. Someone's going to have to supervise and do marine surveys and go with the thing. So that's how we equalise it. All the factors, what's known, what's perceived, doesn't have to be reality, what's perceived to be risk. What are we going to do to manage that risk? What's the cost to manage that risk? And information you don't give us. So if you're supplying us valves and our scope, our specification says we want stainless steel tags, which is pretty standard, and you offer paper tags, and we've only got a week to get this done, and we're doing 120 packages almost simultaneously, and we've got 10 suppliers, then we'll basically say, well, stainless steel tags, oh, okay, that's $1,000. So if you don't put it down, we're going to have a really horrible guess. If you don't tell us how you're going to manage your foreign exchange, we'll have a guess. So you might say, well, okay, our foreign exchange is based on $1 Australian to 7.4 Rand, but if it goes up and down by more than 10%, then we'd like to have a talk about that. So you've got to tell us that. Otherwise, is it based on the Westpac rate of the day or what it is? If you don't tell us, we're going to guess. And this is all going to add up down here till we get to the actual decision making. So you might originally come in at a good price and, you know, schedule might be a factor, different deliveries. But it's all the factors that aren't known and all the risks that are perceived to be there. And as I've said, a real change is, you know, you used to have 5 guys and then you'd shortlist to 3. You might get 2 in the room for a meeting. That doesn't happen. He comes in the room, we have a chat to him. If he agrees and we move on, there's the order gone. He doesn't get the chance to come in and give us another 10% discount. If we can't form a contract with him, or when we do a technical review, we're not happy with it, then we move on through the process. It's short and it's brutal, and it has to be because of the size of the projects and the amount of work we're doing. So you're successful, you're company A, you're coming in the building. So if you're called to a meeting, make sure that the decision makers are in the room. Don't just put a lot of salespeople in the room, wonderful as they are. Make sure people are there that can actually make decisions. They can say, yes, we can improve the schedule, yes, we can perform this, or yes, we can value add here. Look, you know, if you're dealing with an Australian engineering house and, you know, you're over here and it's a relatively small contract, and we call a meeting, don't just necessarily jump on a plane. Think about video conferencing, think about technology. You know, you've always got to put that back against the value of the package. Expect to be flexible. There's got to be some concessions required on both sides to get into the final award. And because of the speed of schedule, pretty much quite often I've actually been in a negotiating meeting. At the end of the meeting, we've handed over the letter of award or the letter of intent. So expect to go straight into that. If during that, at the end of that meeting or towards the end of that meeting, if you haven't sort of been told what the decision-making schedule is, question it. So our tender validity is for another 30 days. When do you expect to make award? Because we've got other work coming up in the factory. Not saying to put all the pressure on, but say these are the factors that are relevant to your decision. As I've said, the people that you put in the room or the people that should be involved in that really, you know, reflects back on your tender and the information you've gathered. We actually use an American model, the zippering model. So if it's oil and gas and there's a QA manager from the client or the engineer, we expect to see your QA manager there. So put the disciplines together. So basically it's not 10 salesmen. Look, if they're really knowledgeable in your systems and can explain that, that's fine. But you've got to look at the technical requirements and what the expectations are. And it's a very limited decision-making period due to time and resource constraints. So project execution, have your operations team available for kick-off meeting. If you get a notice of award or a letter of award, the clock's ticking. If you haven't had a meeting, then you drive it. You know, get in there promptly, probably a couple of weeks after the award, to make sure that, you know, your schedule hasn't been eroded. Quite often during the tendering and the negotiating phase, people give this and say we don't need to provide that. come into the meeting with a list of deliverables against schedule to ensure all parties have expectations. Quite often one of the technical people will already be off on another project or people leave. So get all that in writing. Get that all in writing at the award stage when everyone's still friends. Keep promises, confirm expectations. It's really important to be honest and responsive, especially in reporting. With the tyranny of distance, you know, we only have a 2 or 3 hour window to communicate with South Australia. Sorry, Freudian slip, with South Africa from Western Australia. And if we don't hear anything, we're going to assume the worst. If we're not getting our reports, if we're not seeing photos of materials coming in, we're going to assume the worst. So we need that information. And just a general comment, and we'll move on to resourcing shortly, it takes time and skill to develop new suppliers. And many project procurement teams just are so under-resourced, well, their schedules are so tight, they don't have it. They don't have it within them. So, like I say, there's going to be very, very few opportunities for new suppliers to come online. And this is one of my biggest success stories on a project. This was the original mill motor for Kansanshi. It cost me around $475,000 US when the US dollar meant something. Can't really see it there, but that's a burnt out motor. It was critical path for the project. It was 46 weeks at the time. And basically what happened is they loaded it onto the truck pulled out and was delivering it to the port. And the brake drums on the tyres locked and caught fire. That set fire to the tyres, that set fire to the trailers, that set fire to the packing crate and completely destroyed the motor. So I received a phone call from the motor supplier saying, "We've got some bad news to tell you." And they were right, they did have some bad news to tell me. I said, okay, well I don't really want to ring my client now and tell him that his project is going to be delayed by 46 weeks. He said, no, what's happened is we've cancelled every other order in the factory, we've started cannibalising parts, and your replacement motor will be available in 13 weeks. They delivered it in 11. You know, when I made that phone call to the client and said this is the action and this is what's happening, you know, they were actually happy with that. So like I said, it's about communication, it's about providing a solution. And that's why that's a big success story for me. And the fact is, with that motor supplier, they basically received 98% of my orders for the next 10 years because there's trust.